Hello and welcome. We've all felt it, haven't we? That little shift, that subtle change in our behavior when we realize someone is watching. You're singing in the car, totally lost in the moment, and then you glance over and see the person in the next lane looking at you. Immediately the performance changes, maybe it stops altogether. That feeling, that simple act of being observed changed the reality of the situation. This is something we understand intuitively in our everyday lives. It's a concept that feels so human. But what if that feeling, what if that principle, wasn't just a social phenomenon? What if it was a fundamental law of the universe itself? A law that governs not just how we interact with each other, but how matter behaves at its most tiny, most fundamental level. Today we're going to talk about the observer effect. Not just the idea of people watching each other, but the deep, mind-bending scientific principle that says the simple act of measurement, the simple act of looking at something, can fundamentally alter it. We're going to journey from the strange, swirling world of quantum particles to the quietest corners of our own minds, and see how this one profound idea shapes everything. The story begins in the 20th century, with a man named Werner Heisenberg. He was a brilliant physicist, a pioneer in this new, strange field called quantum mechanics. What he discovered was so counterintuitive, so deeply unsettling, that it changed our understanding of reality forever. He formulated a principle that became known as the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. And it's a cornerstone of this entire discussion. The principle, in its simplest form, states that you cannot simultaneously know the exact position and the exact momentum of a particle. The more precisely you measure one of these properties, the less precisely you can know the other. Think of it like this. Imagine you are in a completely dark room, and you want to know where a very small, very delicate ball is, and also how fast it's moving. The only way you can see the ball is to touch it, perhaps by throwing another, smaller ball at it. If you throw a very gentle ball to find a position, it won't give you a precise location, but it won't significantly alter the ball's speed. But if you want to know the exact position, you have to throw a harder, faster ball. And while that will pinpoint the location perfectly, it will also knock the ball away, completely changing its momentum. You've now found the position, but you've lost the information about its speed. The very tool you used to measure it changed it. This is not a limitation of our technology. It is a fundamental property of the universe. It's a deep, unshakable law that states information comes at a cost. To gain one piece of knowledge, you must give up another. It's this principle, this inherent uncertainty, that leads directly to the core idea of the observer effect. It's the idea that our interaction with the universe is never passive, but the real mind-bending proof, the one that made physicists truly question the nature of reality, came from the double-slit experiment. It's a legendary experiment, a perfect example of quantum strangeness. The setup is simple. You have a source that fires particles, like electrons, towards a barrier with two slits. Behind the barrier is a screen that can detect where the electrons land. Now, if you fire a stream of electrons one by one, and they behave like little billiard balls, you would expect to see two distinct lines on the screen, one directly behind each slit. Just two simple marks. And that's exactly what you see if you don't look. If you don't actively measure which slit the electron goes through, something impossible happens. The electrons somehow manage to go through both slits at the same time, like a wave. They spread out and interfere with each other, creating a complex pattern of light and dark bands on the screen, an interference pattern, the kind of pattern you would see if you threw two pebbles into a pond and their ripples crossed paths. This pattern shows that the electrons are behaving like waves. They are not acting like solid, distinct particles. But here is where it gets truly strange. Here is where the observer effect enters the stage. What happens if we decide to watch? What happens if we place a detector right at the slits to see which one each electron passes through? The moment we do that, the moment we observe their path, the wave-like behavior collapses. The electrons stop acting like waves and start acting like particles again. The interference pattern disappears, and you are left with two simple lines on the screen. The very act of watching, of measuring, forced the electrons to choose a path. It's as if they knew they were being watched and adjusted their behavior accordingly. This isn't a trick of light or a flaw in the equipment. It is a core feature of the universe. The state of a particle is not fixed until it is measured. It exists as a cloud of possibilities, a superposition of all potential states, until an observer, a conscious or unconscious measuring device, collapses that cloud into a single defined reality. This is a profound idea that at the subatomic level, reality is fluid, and our interaction with it gives it form. It's a powerful and strange concept, but for many, the idea of the observer effect has been simplified and applied to our macro world, a world of people and cars and trees. In this context, the term doesn't refer to a quantum collapse, but to a change in behavior that occurs simply because someone is aware they are being watched. This is a very real and very important phenomenon, but it is distinct from the quantum effect. The quantum observer effect is a physical principle, a law of the universe. The human observer effect, often known as the Hawthorne effect, is a psychological one. The Hawthorne effect was discovered during a series of experiments at the Hawthorne Works in Chicago during the 19th. Researchers were trying to determine if different working conditions, like lighting or brakes, would improve worker productivity. What they found was that no matter what changes they made, the workers' productivity seemed to increase. It went up when the lights were brighter, but also when they were dimmer. The workers were simply responding to the attention they were receiving from the researchers. They knew they were being studied, and that knowledge alone was enough to alter their behavior. The attention itself, the observation, was the most powerful variable. This applies to so much in our world today. Think about social media. We are constantly aware that we are being observed. We post pictures knowing they will be seen. We write captions knowing they will be read. That awareness, that observation, shapes what we say and how we present ourselves. We curate our lives, we perform for an audience, and that performance becomes our new reality. The observer effect, in this sense, is not about a physical collapse of a quantum wave function, but a collapse of our uninhibited self into a more polished, curated version. The very act of putting our lives on display changes them. We are both the subject and the observer. But we can take this idea, this concept of the observer effect, even further. What happens when we turn our attention inward? What happens when we become the observer of our own minds? This is the core of practices, like mindfulness and meditation. When we sit quietly and simply watch our thoughts, without judgment, without trying to change them, a strange thing happens. Our thoughts, which once seemed so solid, so real, so much a part of us, begin to lose their power. They lose their hold. A painful memory, an anxious feeling, it can feel all-consuming. But when we observe it, when we label it anxious feeling or a thought about the past, it becomes an object, something separate from us. It is no longer a part of our identity, but something we are simply witnessing. The very act of observing our own consciousness changes it. It gives us a new perspective, a new space to breathe, a moment of freedom from the thing we are observing. So whether we're talking about the subatomic world, where particles change from waves to matter the moment we look at them, or the human world, where our behavior shifts the moment we realize we're being watched, or even our own internal world, where our thoughts become less powerful the moment we observe them, the principle holds true. Reality is not a fixed, unchanging thing, waiting to be discovered. It is in some fundamental way shaped by our awareness, by our interaction, by our attention. It's an incredibly humbling and powerful idea. It suggests that our role in the universe is not simply to be a passive witness. Our presence, our very act of looking, changes the world around us. This realization, however, raises a difficult question. Who is the observer? In the quantum world, does the act of observation require a conscious being? Or is any form of interaction, any measurement, enough to collapse the wave function? This question has divided the scientific community. The standard interpretation, known as the Copenhagen interpretation, suggests that the wave function collapses upon measurement by an external device, but it doesn't specify if that device needs a conscious observer to interpret the result. The famous physicist Erwin Schrödinger even proposed a thought experiment to highlight the absurdity of this. He imagined a cat in a box with a radioactive atom and a vial of poison. The atom exists in a superposition of two states, decayed and not decayed, according to the quantum rules. Until the box is opened and a measurement is made, the cat inside is in a superposition of both alive and dead states. It is only the act of observation, of opening the box, that forces the reality to collapse into one or the other. This thought experiment was intended to show how strange and counterintuitive the Copenhagen interpretation truly is, by applying it to the macroscopic world we know. Yet it serves as a powerful metaphor for the idea that a final reality is not settled until it is witnessed. Then there is the many-world interpretation, which offers a different solution. This theory suggests that the wave function never truly collapses. Instead, every time a measurement is made, the universe splits into multiple parallel universes. In one universe, the electron goes through the left slit. In another, it goes through the right. In every possible outcome, there is a universe where that outcome is realized. The observer doesn't cause a collapse, but rather their own existence, their own awareness, is now intertwined with a specific branch of this ever-splitting reality. This perspective removes the strange role of the observer, by simply assuming that all possibilities are always, simultaneously, real. It is a staggering idea, and it illustrates how deeply the simple act of observation challenges our most basic assumptions about the nature of reality itself. We are not just watching the universe. We are part of its unfolding, and our awareness of it seems to be intimately tied to its very definition. This paradox isn't confined to the subatomic. It spills into our shared reality in increasingly tangible ways. We now live in a surveillance society, a world where our actions are often recorded, analyzed, and stored. Every time you walk past a public camera, every time you browse a website, every time you click a link, you are being observed by a network of systems and algorithms. This pervasive observation has a profound effect on our behavior. The knowledge that we might be watched can lead us to self-censor. It can make us less spontaneous, less willing to take risks, less authentic. The simple, intuitive observer effect we felt in the car now scales up to a societal level. The potential for observation collapses our spontaneous human freedom into a more predictable and often more controlled form of behavior. Our digital footprints become a curated version of our lives, and we become the performers in a play where the audience is an ever-present, silent network of data collection. But perhaps the most profound example of the observer effect is one we carry with us every moment: the subtle, fragile nature of our own memories. For decades, we believed memories were like files on a computer hard drive. Once saved, they were permanent and unchanging. But neuroscience is now telling us something different. It turns out that every time we recall a memory, we are not just retrieving it, we are recreating it. The act of observation, of bringing that memory to the forefront of our minds, makes it plastic and susceptible to change. This process is called memory reconsolidation. When we remember an event, our brain temporarily unlocks the memory, making it vulnerable to new information. If we recall a past event while feeling a different emotion or receiving new details, that information can be woven into the original memory. It is a powerful and sometimes unsettling form of the observer effect. The very act of looking at our past can change it. It suggests that our own personal history is not a fixed narrative, but a dynamic, ever-changing story, shaped and reshaped by our present awareness. A traumatic event can be softened, a cherished moment can be embellished, all because the act of revisiting it is not a passive retrieval, but an active, creative process. Our own consciousness, our very presence in the moment, is a powerful observer, constantly editing and updating the archives of our lives. But this idea that the act of observation creates reality has even more unsettling implications. It suggests that what we choose to look at, what we choose to measure, might be the very thing that gives it shape. In the world of data, this is known as the observer bias. It's the idea that our own preconceived notions, our own biases, can influence the way we gather and interpret data. When we design a scientific study or an experiment, our questions, our methods, our very assumptions become a kind of lens through which we are observing the world, and that lens can distort the picture. A classic example is the placebo effect. A person's belief that a treatment will work simply by virtue of their being in the study can cause real measurable changes in their health. The patient's observation, their expectation, becomes a powerful force shaping the outcome of the experiment. The universe responds to the questions we ask of it. This principle extends into the world of artificial intelligence, the algorithms that are beginning to shape so much of our society. These systems are powerful observers, tasked with seeing patterns in massive datasets. But the data itself is a record of our past observations, our human biases, our flawed judgments. An algorithm trained on a biased dataset will observe and learn to replicate that bias. It is a modern-day double-slit experiment. But instead of an electron, we are shaping the future of information itself. The observer, in this case the algorithm, is not a passive mirror reflecting reality, but an active sculptor, giving form to our pre-existing prejudices. We are now being observed by systems that are built in our own image, reflecting back to us the very biases we encoded into them. It's a closed loop of observation and creation, a feedback cycle that is increasingly difficult to escape. The observer effect takes on its most dramatic form when we apply it to history itself. We often think of history as a static record of what happened, a collection of facts that are simply there for us to uncover. But the truth is, our relationship with the past is a dynamic one. Every time a historian selects a document to study, every time an archivist chooses what to preserve, every time a museum curator decides which artifacts to display, they are acting as observers, and their choices, their perspectives, their very act of looking at one thing and not another, fundamentally shapes the narrative that is handed down to us. History is not a complete objective truth, but a story told from the perspective of those who observed it, and from the perspective of those who are currently observing the records of it. This is why historical narratives change over time, why once forgotten figures are suddenly rediscovered, and why past events are reinterpreted through the lens of the present. The present observer, our current culture, our collective consciousness, has a powerful effect on the past we choose to see. The past, in a very real sense, is still being written by our attention. Think of it in terms of a photograph. A single photograph captures a moment in time, but it is not the full reality of that moment. It is a single observation, a chosen perspective. What is just outside the frame? What happened a second before, or a second after the shutter snapped? The photograph is a single point of data, but it is treated as a complete truth. We observe it, and we build a story around it, often forgetting that the observer who took the photo made countless choices that shaped what we are seeing. The observer effect here is the gap between the truth and the perception of the truth. It is the active, creative process of narrative building that occurs the moment we decide to look at, to interpret, to pay attention to a piece of the past. The same principle applies to our shared collective memory. When we celebrate certain historical victories and quietly forget others, we are not just ignoring the past, we are actively reshaping it. We are collapsing a complex superposition of historical possibilities into a single dominant narrative. The act of remembrance becomes an act of creation. The same forces are at play in our global economy. Market speculation, the movement of stock prices, is a fascinating example of the observer effect in action. The value of a stock is not an inherent property of a company. It is the collective observation of millions of people. A company could be performing well with solid fundamentals, but if enough investors start to observe it as a failing company and begin to sell off its shares, its value will collapse. The simple act of observation, the collective belief of the observers, becomes the reality of the market. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy. The market is not a passive mirror of reality, but a powerful fluid system that responds to and is shaped by our collective attention. It is a profound, real-world example of how our shared consciousness can give form to a reality that was once just a cloud of possibilities. But the most potent and intimate example of the observer effect may be found not in technology or markets, but within ourselves, in the relationship between mind and body. This is where the placebo effect and its dark twin, the nocebo effect, come into play. For decades, the placebo effect was dismissed as a curious anomaly, a quirk of human psychology. We thought of it as fake medicine, a sugar pill given to a patient that, despite containing no active ingredients, miraculously makes them feel better. But recent research suggests it is far more than that. It is a powerful illustration of how the mind's expectations, how our very act of observing our own potential for healing, can create a measurable physiological response. When a patient is given a placebo and told it is a powerful drug, their brain releases natural opioids. It can even alter heart rate and blood pressure. The patient's belief, their internal narrative about what is happening to their body, collapses a potential outcome of sickness into a reality of wellness. The observer effect here is not about a conscious observer, but about a powerful subconscious one. Our own minds observing a potential future and giving it form. The patient is not just taking a pill. They are an active participant in their own healing. The nocebo effect is the inverse. It's when a patient's negative expectations, their belief that a treatment will cause harm, actually causes them to experience negative side effects, even from an inert substance. The mind, in this case, observes a future of pain and discomfort and actively creates it. This is not simply a matter of a patient thinking they feel sick. Their bodies can produce real, measurable symptoms. This highlights a powerful truth. What we choose to believe, what we observe to be true, becomes our reality on a biological level. It is a profound and humbling idea that our consciousness is not just passively processing information, but actively shaping our physical world, cell by cell, synapse by synapse. Our attention, our belief, is a biological force. And if this is true for a single person, what happens when this phenomenon is scaled up to a collective level? What happens when a shared belief, a shared observation of a certain reality, takes hold in a society? Think of the collective anxiety that can arise from a televised news report about a rare illness. The information, the observation, spreads through a community, and the shared fear can lead to a collective physiological response, even if the threat is minimal. Our shared observations, our shared beliefs about what is happening in the world, are not just passive data points. They are active forces that can give form to a collective reality. The world we live in is not a static place. It is a fluid, dynamic, and ever-changing reality, shaped by the collective attention of all of us. The observer effect also permeates the very fabric of our scientific endeavors in ways that transcend the double-slit experiment. In physics, the act of attempting to measure a system, even a macroscopic one, introduces perturbations. For example, to measure the temperature of a hot liquid, we must insert a thermometer. That thermometer, being at a lower temperature, will absorb some of the liquid's heat, slightly altering the very temperature we are trying to measure. The instrument becomes part of the system, and the act of measurement influences the outcome. This is a classic example of an observer effect in classical mechanics, a subtle but unavoidable truth. The closer we look, the more we interfere. This isn't just an issue for thermometers. In any scientific field, the tools and methodologies we use to observe a phenomenon can, by their very nature, shape what we find. The questions we ask, the scales we use, the biases in our experimental design, all become a part of the observed reality. A scientist is not just a passive witness to a truth that exists independently. They are an active participant in revealing it. But what about the universe on the grandest scale? Can the observer effect apply to cosmology? Some theoretical physicists have proposed that our very existence, the existence of conscious observers, is a necessary condition for the universe to be the way it is. This is known as the anthropic principle. The weak anthropic principle states that we must be located in a region of the universe that is compatible with our existence, which seems fairly obvious. However, The strong anthropic principle goes further. It suggests that the universe was in some way fine-tuned for the emergence of life and conscious observers. This leads to a truly mind-bending possibility, that the universe in a quantum sense was a vast superposition of possibilities, until conscious observers came into being and collapsed it into the specific reality we find ourselves in. A reality with laws of physics that allow stars to form, planets to exist, and life to evolve. It's a controversial idea, and difficult to test scientifically, but it serves as the ultimate expression of the observer effect. The universe observes itself through us. The vast infinite potential of all possible universes collapses into a single concrete reality, the moment there is something, or someone, to see it. This brings us back to the most intimate and profound place of all, our own lives. We often define ourselves by our past, our experiences, the stories we tell ourselves. But as we've learned, the very act of telling a story about our past is an act of observation, an act of creative reshaping. We are constantly observing our own lives, not just in moments of quiet reflection, but in our everyday actions. When you choose to get out of bed in the morning, you are collapsing a universe of possibilities where you stayed in bed. When you choose a certain path in your career, you are collapsing all the other paths you could have taken. Our lives are a continuous process of observation and creation, a series of choices that give form to a single lived reality from an infinite superposition of potential lives. The observer is not just watching, they are choosing. The observer is not just witnessing, they are creating. The reality of our lives is a direct result of the choices we observe and make. The observer effect even finds its way into the realm of art and creativity. Consider a painter looking at a landscape. The painter's canvas is not a perfect mirror of the scene before them. Their vision, their emotional state, the specific colors and brushes they choose, all of these are acts of observation and interpretation that fundamentally change the reality of the scene as it is translated to the canvas. The final painting is a unique reality, one that could not exist without the painter's conscious observation. The art is a direct reflection of how the artist, as the observer, shaped the world they saw. But the process doesn't stop there. Once the painting is finished, it enters the world and becomes a new object of observation. Each person who looks at the painting brings their own memories, emotions, and experiences to it. The painting, in turn, takes on a new reality for each viewer. The very same painting can be a source of joy for one person and profound sadness for another. The observer's interaction with the art, their personal observation of it, changes its meaning. The artwork itself exists as a superposition of all possible interpretations, and the individual viewer's gaze collapses that cloud of potential meaning into a single, unique, personal reality. This also applies to storytelling and literature. A writer observes the world and a particular human experience, and then crafts a story. But the story itself is not a fixed, unchanging truth. When a reader picks up a book, they become the observer. Their interpretation of the characters, their emotional connection to the plot, and their imagination of the setting all contribute to the final reality of the story. A writer might intend for a character to be a tragic hero, but a reader could observe that character's actions and see them as deeply flawed and selfish. The reader's observation gives the character a new reality, a different existence from the one the author first conceived. Every time a new person reads a classic novel, they are, in a sense, rewriting it. They are collapsing the vast potential of the narrative into a single personal experience. It is a powerful form of co-creation, a collaboration between the creator and the observer, where the meaning of the art is a direct result of the attention it receives. And the most powerful example of this co-creative relationship between observer and observed may be in our relationship with the future itself. We often talk about the future as if it's a fixed destination. We're all hurtling toward a road that has already been paved. But the observer effect suggests a different, more empowering reality. The future, just like the quantum particle, exists as a superposition of all possible outcomes. It is a cloud of potential, not a single defined reality. And our collective observation of it, our collective focus and belief, is the force that collapses that cloud into a single unfolding path. When a society collectively observes a future of climate disaster, a future of division, a future of economic despair. Our shared attention gives that reality energy and form. Our fear and our focus on that specific outcome can become a self-fulfilling prophecy, shaping our actions and our policies in ways that bring that very reality into being. But what if we chose to observe a different future? What if we chose to observe a future of collaboration, a future of sustainability, a future where technology is used to uplift humanity? That act of collective observation, that shared belief, that focused attention on a positive outcome, is the most powerful force we have to change the course of history. It's the difference between being a passive witness to a future that seems to be happening to us and becoming an active participant in a future we are co-creating. The observer effect, in this grandest sense, is a radical call to hope. It tells us that what we choose to look at, what we choose to believe, and what we choose to give our attention to is not just a personal matter. It is the very mechanism through which the world we want to live in can come into being. This is the great work of our time, to become conscious observers, to use our awareness not just to witness the world's problems, but to illuminate and give form to its potential. It is a profound and humbling idea that the universe we experience is not just out there, waiting for us to find it. It is also in here, waiting for us to dream it, and then to observe it into being. The universe is still being written by us. So, if our observation shapes reality on so many levels, from the quantum to the cognitive, what does this mean for our personal responsibility? It means we are not just passengers on this journey. We are active participants, co-creators of the world we inhabit. The simple act of paying attention, of truly seeing something, gives it reality. When we pay attention to kindness, we give it power. When we focus on conflict, we give it energy. The simple act of observing, a quiet moment of beauty, a small gesture of humanity, an idea, a dream, the simple act of holding it in our awareness brings it more fully into being. This is the profound, beautiful paradox of the observer effect. We are not just viewers of the universe, we are its witnesses, and in some mysterious way, its creators. Our consciousness, our attention is a force of nature, and how we choose to wield it is the most important choice we can make. It's the difference between a universe that is fixed and dead and one that is alive and still being written by us. The observer effect extends its influence even to the world of technology, particularly in the realm of user experience design and behavioral analytics. When a company designs a website or an application, they often employ a form of observation to understand how users interact with their product. They track mouse movements, click patterns, and the time spent on each page. This data is then used to optimize the user journey. But the very act of tracking and analyzing this behavior can change it. This is a subtle but powerful form of the observer effect in the digital age. Consider the common practice of A/B testing. A company presents two different versions of a web page to users to see which one performs better. While they are observing which version gets more clicks or conversions, the very knowledge that the user is part of an experiment can influence their behavior. A user might act differently simply because they feel they are being watched or analyzed. The data they collect might be accurate, but it represents a reality that was, in part, created by the act of observation itself. In a world of infinite possibilities for how a user might behave, the design of the experiment collapses those possibilities into a limited set of observable realities. This raises a deeper ethical question about our relationship with technology. We are now in a world where technology is a constant, unblinking observer of our lives. Smartphones track our location, fitness trackers monitor our heart rate, and smart speakers listen for our commands. While these technologies offer convenience, they also present a new form of the observer effect at a personal and societal scale. The potential for continuous observation from these devices can subtly influence our behavior, even when we are alone. We might be less likely to sing out loud in our living room if we know our smart speaker is listening. We might choose a different walking route if we know it's being tracked. The technology becomes a silent partner in the choices we make, and its observation can collapse our spontaneous behavior into a more predictable and curated form. His is the new subtle surveillance that doesn't require a government camera, but is embedded in the very tools we use to navigate our modern lives. The more we are observed, the more predictable we become. But the observer effect has an even more profound impact on the most complex of all systems, our interpersonal relationships. The simple act of being observed by someone we love or someone we fear can fundamentally change who we are. Think of the dynamic in a parent-child relationship. A child's identity is often shaped by the expectations of their parents. The child observes the parents' approval or disapproval and internalizes those observations, shaping their personality and behavior to match the perceived expectations. The parent, as the observer, is actively participating in the creation of the child's identity. The child exists in a superposition of all possible selves, and the parent's observational feedback collapses those possibilities into a single defined reality of who they are expected to be. This is a beautiful and sometimes tragic process. In a loving relationship, the act of observation can be a powerful force for growth. When a partner sees our potential, our strengths, and our best qualities, their positive observation can help collapse that potential into reality. We begin to act in ways that align with their belief in us. This is why we often say a good partner brings out the best in us. They are simply observing a reality we were not yet able to see in ourselves, and their attention helps make it manifest. Conversely, in a toxic relationship, the observation of a partner can be a force of limitation. If a partner only sees our flaws, our weaknesses, or our past mistakes, their observation can collapse our reality into a self-fulfilling prophecy of failure. We become what they observe us to be. We are constantly seeking their validation or avoiding their judgment, and that struggle becomes the central theme of our identity within that relationship. Our being is no longer a fluid cloud of potential, but a fixed, rigid form created by the limiting gaze of another. This is the ultimate paradox of the human observer effect. The greatest gift we can give another person is the gift of positive observation, to see their potential, to acknowledge their light, and to hold a space for them to become the best version of themselves. To be the kind of observer that expands the universe of possibilities for another person, rather than collapsing it. This brings us to a final grand synthesis. We've journeyed from the strange world of quantum mechanics to the psychological complexities of the human mind, to the digital landscapes of technology, and to the intimate dance of our relationships. We have seen that the simple, powerful act of observation is a force that is constantly giving form to reality. But what does this mean for us as individuals? It means that we are not just passengers in a universe that is unfolding around us. We are, in a very real sense, the observers who are helping to create it. We are not just witnessing reality, we are shaping it with every thought, every feeling, and every conscious choice we make. The world we live in is not a static canvas, but a living, breathing, and ever-changing work of art. And the brush we use to paint it is our attention. What we choose to observe, what we choose to focus on, and what we choose to give our energy to is the very thing that is made manifest in our lives and in the world around us. So the greatest question is not what reality is, but what reality we are choosing to create with our attention. It is a profound and humbling responsibility. The observer effect is also at work in the quiet corners of our educational institutions, shaping the futures of the next generation. Consider the Pygmalion effect, also known as the Rosenthal effect. This psychological phenomenon illustrates how a teacher's high expectations of a student can lead to improved performance, while low expectations can lead to the opposite. It is a powerful example of the observer effect in a real-world, human context. A teacher, as the observer, holds a belief about a student's potential. This belief, even if subconscious, changes their behavior towards the student. They might offer more encouragement, provide more challenging work, or simply give more positive attention. The student, in turn, internalizes this observation. They begin to see themselves as smart or capable. And this new self-perception collapses the potential for failure into a reality of success. The student's reality is, in a very real sense, created by the teacher's act of observation. This is a profound ethical challenge for educators, urging them to become aware of their own biases and to be the kind of observers who bring out the best in their students. This principle, however, is not limited to human-to-human interaction. In the vast field of scientific research, especially in disciplines like ecology and sociology, The act of observation is never truly neutral. When a biologist places a camera trap to observe a rare animal, or a sociologist conducts a survey to understand a community, the presence of the observational tool itself can alter the behavior of the subjects being studied. A community might respond to survey questions in a way they think the researcher wants them to, a phenomenon known as the social desirability bias. Animals might avoid an area with a camera trap or change their foraging habits. The act of measuring a system changes the system. This brings a critical ethical dimension to all scientific inquiry. How do we, as observers, minimize our impact and ensure that what we are measuring is not simply a product of our measurement? It's a fundamental paradox of knowledge, reminding us that we can never truly step outside the system we are trying to understand. But perhaps the most chilling application of the observer effect today is the subtle erosion of our privacy. We have willingly entered a world where we are constantly observed, not just by other people, but by algorithms and data systems. We exchange personal information for convenience, and in doing so we invite a pervasive observation that shapes our choices in ways we are not always aware of. Our search histories, our purchase habits, and our social connections are all being meticulously watched and analyzed. This constant observation creates a new kind of observer effect on a societal scale. Knowing that we are being watched can lead to a chilling effect, a subconscious self-censorship. We might be less willing to express a controversial opinion online, less likely to explore an unconventional interest, or less inclined to engage in a conversation that might be misunderstood. The freedom to simply be without being watched becomes a rare and valuable commodity. We begin to act in ways that are safe, predictable, and approved of by the silent, digital observers. The vast and messy cloud of our true selves is collapsed into a curated, palatable, and often less authentic version for the benefit of these observing systems. This paradox reaches its emotional peak in our most intimate relationships. To be truly seen by another person is one of the most powerful and fundamental human needs. The simple act of a friend or a partner, observing our struggles, our fears, and our pain without judgment, can be a transformative experience. Their non-judgmental observation gives our feelings a reality. It validates them, and it allows us to move through them rather than hide from them. In this sense, the observer effect is not just a scientific principle, but a powerful tool for empathy and connection. When we genuinely listen to someone, we are not just receiving information, we are actively participating in the creation of their story. We are helping them to give form to their feelings and thoughts. The act of being seen helps them to exist more fully. And this takes us to the most beautiful metaphor of all. Imagine the universe not as a fixed mechanical system, but as a vast, untended garden of infinite potential. Every seed in this garden represents a possibility. A seed of joy, a seed of sorrow, a seed of war, a seed of peace. For these seeds to grow, they require energy, they require light, and they require attention. Our consciousness, our collective and individual awareness, is the sunlight in this garden. What we choose to look at, what we choose to nurture with our attention, is the very thing that grows into reality. If we continuously water and give our attention to the seeds of division and fear, those seeds will sprout and fill our world. But if we consciously choose to turn our attention to the seeds of kindness, of creativity, and of connection, then those are the realities we will see blossom in our lives and in our world. This is the great work of our time. It's not just about understanding the world, but about consciously choosing which parts of it we want to grow. It is a profound and humbling idea that we are not just passive passengers in a universe that is unfolding around us. We are, in a very real sense, the gardeners of reality. Our choices, our thoughts, and our attention are the most powerful tools we have. The observer effect, in its final and most profound sense, is a radical call to hope. It tells us that our role in this universe is not just to witness, it is to create. The world we want to live in, the future we want to build, exists in a cloud of potential, and it is waiting for us to find it, to see it, and to observe it into being. The universe is not a finished book. It is a living, breathing story that is still being written by us. The observer effect is an invisible force that shapes not just the grandest scientific theories, but the most intimate details of our lives. It is at the heart of our media and our modern economy. For decades, we believed that the news media was a passive mirror, simply reflecting the events of the world. But a journalist is a powerful observer, and every choice they make, which stories to cover, which angles to take, which quotes to include, collapses a complex, messy reality into a single defined narrative. The reality we perceive from the morning news is not a complete truth. It is a meticulously crafted observation. And this effect is amplified by the digital world. The algorithms that recommend content to us are observers, watching our every click and scroll. They learn what we pay attention to, and in a powerful feedback loop, they show us more of it. Our reality becomes a curated, self-reinforcing echo chamber, where the potential for diverse perspectives is collapsed into a single familiar narrative that we have, in part, created with our own attention. This same principle is a key driver of modern economic systems. The value of a stock, a currency, or even a cryptocurrency is not an inherent property. It is, in a very real sense, the collective observation of millions of people. A company's stock might have strong fundamentals, but if enough traders and algorithms observe it as a failing investment and begin to sell, the collective observation becomes reality. The price plummets. This is the self-fulfilling prophecy of the market. A perfect example of how our collective attention can give form to a reality that was once just a cloud of possibilities. The market is not a passive mirror of economic health. It is a powerful fluid system that responds to and is shaped by our shared beliefs. It is a profound, real-world example of how our collective consciousness can create financial reality out of thin air. But perhaps the most intimate and personal example of the observer effect is our relationship with our own self-identity. We often think of our identity as a fixed, unchanging core of who we are. But a more accurate metaphor is that our identity exists in a superposition of all possible selves. We are constantly in a state of becoming, and the most powerful observer of this process is our own mind through the voice of our internal dialogue. The stories we tell ourselves, I am not good at public speaking, I am a creative person, I am an anxious person, are not just passive descriptions. They are powerful observations that collapse the vast potential of who we can be into a single defined reality. For example, if you consistently tell yourself you are not a math person, that constant internal observation will shape your choices. You will avoid math classes, shy away from tasks that require calculation, and reinforce the very reality you are observing. The potential to be proficient in math exists in the cloud of possibilities, but your self-talk, your internal observation, collapses that potential, preventing it from ever becoming a reality. The greatest work we can do is to become conscious observers of our own minds, to notice the limiting stories we tell ourselves, and to consciously choose to observe a new, more expansive reality for ourselves. And finally, consider the profound implications of the observer effect in the justice system. We rely on the testimony of witnesses to establish what really happened. But as we've already discussed, memory is not a fixed video recording. It is a dynamic reconstructive process. The very act of a witness recalling an event, especially under the pressure of questioning, can fundamentally alter their memory of it. Their act of observing their past changes it. This means that a witness, a police officer, a lawyer, and a jury are all powerful observers, each with their own biases and perspectives, each of whom is actively participating in the creation of a legal reality that may or may not be the complete truth. The verdict in a courtroom is not just a reflection of the facts. It is the ultimate expression of the observer effect, where the collective observation of the jury collapses a universe of possibilities and interpretations into a single declared reality of guilt or innocence. It is a humbling and sometimes terrifying truth. The observer effect also profoundly impacts the field of medicine. We have already explored the placebo and nocebo effects, but the principle extends to the core of the doctor-patient relationship. A doctor is a primary observer of a patient's health. The very act of diagnosis, the careful observation of symptoms, the analysis of lab results, and the naming of an illness is a powerful act of collapsing a patient's state from a cloud of amorphous, unexplainable discomfort into a single defined reality. A patient may have been feeling unwell for years, but it is not until a doctor provides an official diagnosis that the illness becomes real for them. The diagnosis provides a name, a prognosis, and a treatment path, and it fundamentally changes how the patient sees themselves and their future. This is not to say that the illness was not real before the diagnosis, but the diagnosis itself as an act of observation gives it a new and definitive reality in the patient's mind. The doctor's gaze, their expert observation, creates a narrative that the patient then lives into. This underscores the immense responsibility of medical professionals to not only be accurate in their observations, but also to be compassionate and empathetic in how they communicate them, as their words and demeanor can shape the very reality of a patient's healing journey. This principle extends to public health as well. When a public health organization, a government agency, or a journalist observes and reports on a pandemic, they are not simply reflecting an objective reality, they are shaping it. The media's constant observation of rising case numbers, the government's observation of public behavior, and the public's observation of one another's actions all contribute to a collective reality of fear, caution, or defiance. This shared observation, this collective anxiety or sense of security, influences a cascade of decisions that have real-world consequences, from how people choose to socialize to the policies governments enact. It's a macroscopic example of the observer effect in action, where the collective consciousness, through its shared attention to a crisis, gives form to the societal response. The observer effect even impacts our relationship with the natural world. For centuries, humanity has seen itself as a detached observer of nature, a separate entity that simply witnesses the world. But our modern scientific tools and our collective attention have revealed a different reality. When climate scientists observe rising global temperatures, melting glaciers, and extreme weather events, their observations are not passive. The very act of measuring and reporting on these phenomena has transformed climate change from an abstract scientific theory into a tangible political and social reality. The data, the graphs, the satellite images, they are all acts of observation that have collapsed the potential for a stable climate into the reality of a global crisis. This crisis now demands action and reshapes our economies, our policies, and our daily lives. In this sense, we are not just observing nature. Our observation of its fragility has created a new reality of shared responsibility and action. The universe, in its ecological sense, is not a fixed, unchanging thing. It is a system that responds to and is shaped by our attention to it. The observer effect is an invisible thread that connects all these disparate fields. It is a fundamental paradox of knowledge itself. The closer we look, the more we interfere. The more we measure, the more we change. The more we define, the more we limit. But it is also a powerful and hopeful idea. It suggests that reality is not a fixed, predetermined thing that is happening to us. It is a living, breathing, and ever-changing work of art that is being created by our attention. The world we want to live in, the future we want to build, the person we want to be, all exist in a cloud of potential. And it is waiting for us to find it, to see it, and to observe it into being. The universe is not a finished book. It is a living, breathing story that is still being written by us. The observer effect also extends to the most complex and intimate system of all, our relationship with ourselves. Our self-identity is not a static, fixed entity. It is a dynamic, ever-changing process. A more accurate metaphor is that our identity exists in a superposition of all possible selves. We are constantly in a state of becoming. And the most powerful observer of this process is our own mind, through the voice of our internal dialogue, the stories we tell ourselves. I am not a creative person. I am an anxious person. I am a failure, are not just passive descriptions. They are powerful observations that collapse the vast potential of who we can be into a single defined reality. For example, if you consistently tell yourself you are not a math person, that constant internal observation will shape your choices. You will avoid math classes, shy away from tasks that require calculation, and reinforce the very reality you are observing. The potential to be proficient in math exists in the cloud of possibilities, but your self-talk, your internal observation, collapses that potential, preventing it from ever becoming a reality. The greatest work we can do is to become conscious observers of our own minds, to notice the limiting stories we tell ourselves, and to consciously choose to observe a new, more expansive reality for ourselves. And finally, consider the profound implications of the observer effect in the justice system. We rely on the testimony of witnesses to establish what really happened, but as we've already discussed, memory is not a fixed video recording. It is a dynamic, reconstructive process. The very act of a witness recalling an event, especially under the pressure of questioning, can fundamentally alter their memory of it. Their act of observing their past changes it. This means that a witness, a police officer, a lawyer, and a jury are all powerful observers, each with their own biases and perspectives, each of whom is actively participating in the creation of a legal reality that may or may not be the complete truth. A verdict in a courtroom is not just a reflection of the facts, it is the ultimate expression of the observer effect, where the collective observation of the jury collapses a universe of possibilities and interpretations into a single declared reality of guilt or innocence. It is a humbling and sometimes terrifying truth. The observer effect is a radical call to a new kind of awareness. It challenges the very foundation of our assumptions about what is real and what is possible. It tells us that we are not just passive viewers of a fixed universe, but active participants in a living, breathing reality that is shaped by our attention. It is a profound and humbling idea, but the universe we experience is not just out there waiting for us to find it. It is also in here waiting for us to dream it, and then to observe it into being. The universe is still being written by us.